beauty, worth, and human dignity, a response to modern beauty standards.
Yes, this came from an article I wanted to react to on believing that I am beautiful in a world that tells me I am not. Ashley Vaughn writes that ugly girls have the best sexual organs, and this episode is a reaction to her essay. Her thesis is that she believes that she is beautiful in a world that tells her that she is not.
Interesting, Mr. Ming. I recently read a deeply personal essay by a young woman named Ashi who describe a lifetimes of being told she's ugly by society standards. The experiences range from cruel family dynamics to public humiliation. Yet, she's concluded by declaring herself beautiful despite what the world tells her. What strikes me is most is how she internalized this transactional view of beauty and sexuality. Where do we even begin with something this painful, Mr. Meg?
First, we begin with grief. What you shared reveals the profound spiritual violence that occurs when human beings are reduced to their physical appearance and sexual utility. This young woman's story is a testament to what happens when we abandon the foundational Christian truth that every person is made in the image and likeness of God, what we call the imago Dei. Her experiences with those boys in middle school, the lifeguards, and even her own sister represent a fundamental denial of inherent dignity as a beloved daughter of the Creator. The tragedy here isn't just personal pain, it's the systemic reduction of human persons to objects of consumption. When that man on the street declares that ugly girls have the best sexual experiences, he's not making a crude compliment. He's articulating the commodification of feminine sexuality that treats women as products to be evaluated, ranked, and used based on perceived physical value. In conclusion, this is precisely what St. John Paul II warned against in his theology of the body when he spoke about the difference between love and use.
Mr. Meg, that distinction between love and you seems crucial here. But let's be honest, this is not just about crude men on the street. Ashley describes how, even as a child, she was comparing herself to her sister, feeling less worthy because she's way 2 pounds more. Does teaching values address these deep psychological wounding that seems to start so early?
This psychological dimension is that you're highlighting and it reveals how original sin manifests in our relationships and self perception. St. Augustine wrote extensively about how the fall affected our capacity to see ourselves and others correctly. When Ashley compares herself to her sister at that school physical examination, she's already operating within a framework that measures human worth through physical attributes, a framework that contradicts everything Christianity teaches about human dignity. The church fathers, particularly St. John Chrysostom, wrote extensively about the dangers of what they called vainglory, not just personal vanity, but the broader social sin of measuring human worth through external appearance. Chrysostom argued that this distorts both how we see ourselves and how we see others. When Ashley's sister calls her fat and ugly, when those boys demand secrecy about their relationships with her, when that friend recoils in horror at being associated with her romantically, these aren't just personal cruelties. They're manifestations of a culture that has forgotten the most basic Christian anthropological truth that every human person possesses inherent, inalienable dignity that cannot be distinguished by physical appearance, social status, or any external characteristic. The psychological wounding you mention is real because it attacks something fundamental, our knowledge of being beloved by God. In conclusion, when a child learns to see herself as less valuable because of physical appearance, she's learning a lie about her own nature that will affect every subsequent relationship, including her relationship with God.
Mr. Mink, the relationship aspect is particularly heartbreaking. Ashley describes being desired privately but never publicly, being good enough for sexual encounters but not for introduction to families. How does this pattern reflect broader cultural problems with sexuality and commitment?
What you've identified is the pornographic mentality applied to real relationships, the separation of sexual desire from personal commitment, love, and public recognition. This is exactly what Pope Francis addresses when he critiques the throwaway culture that treats people as disposable commodities. When those young men tell Ashley to keep their relationship secret, they're practicing what moral theologians call instrumental use, treating her as a means to their own gratification rather than recognizing her as a person worthy of love and public commitment. The late night message asking her to sneak out for sexual encounters while maintaining public rejection is a perfect example of how pornographic thinking corrupts authentic human relationships. The Catholic understanding of sexuality, rooted in natural law, insists that sexual desire and expression are inherently ordered towards total self gift, what we call the unitive dimension of sexuality. This includes emotional, spiritual, and social unity, not just physical pleasure. When sexuality is divorced from these other dimensions, it becomes what St. Thomas Aquinas would call disordered, not because physical pleasure is evil, but because it's separated from its full human context. The pattern Ashley describes, private desire without public commitment, reveals how our culture has forgotten what authentic love requires. Love demands what the church calls integration, the harmony between physical attraction, emotional connection, spiritual communion, and social commitment. In conclusion, when any of these elements is missing or distorted, the relationship becomes exploitative rather than loving.
Let's dig deeper into the fascination aspect, Mr. Mick. Ashley mentions being afraid to be friends with very attractive men because of the past humiliations she developed that she calls self-sabotage patterns. How does a biblical anthropology help us understand these kind of psychological and spiritual damage?
What Ashley describes is what spiritual directors call spiritual trauma, wounds to the soul that affect how a person relates to God, to others, and to herself. The self sabotage patterns you mentioned aren't just psychological defense mechanisms, they're symptoms of what happens when a person's fundamental sense of worth has been attacked. St. Teresa of Avila, in her Interior Castle, describes how early experiences of rejection or humiliation can create what she calls interior fortresses, defensive structures in the soul that protect against further hurt, but also prevent authentic relationships. When Ashley says she avoids friendships with very attractive men or fears making the first move romantically, she's describing these interior fortresses. The Catholic tradition offers a profound understanding of how identity formation works. According to St. Thomas Aquinas, we come to know ourselves primarily through relationship, first with God, then with others. When those early relationships consistently communicate messages about our unworthiness, they distort what theologians call our fundamental option, our basic orientation towards ourselves, others, and God. That's why the church insists that Christian formation must address the whole person. Ashley's experiences reveal how beauty standards function as a form of what liberation theologians call structural sin, systems that consistently deny human dignity and prevent people from flourishing as God intends. When a culture systemically devalues people based on physical appearance, it's not just creating individual psychological problems, it's creating spiritual obstacles that prevent people from receiving and giving love as God designed. The healing Ashley describes, learning to deem myself beautiful in a world that does not think that I am, is actually a deeply spiritual process. She's learning to ground her identity in something more fundamental than cultural approval. In conclusion, from a Catholic perspective, this is the beginning of authentic spiritual maturity.
Maturity indeed. And Mr. Make the phrase deem myself Beautiful is powerful, but I notice he still struggles with believing that attractive people could genuinely find her attractive. How does value teaching on beauty and attraction help us think through this tension?
The tension you've identified reveals the difference between what St. Augustine calls beauty as appearance and beauty as being. Augustine argued that true beauty is ontological, being, or who we truly are. It's about the nature of a thing, not just its external appearance. In his Confessions, he writes about learning to see beauty as a reflection of God's own beauty, which is perfect goodness and truth. The Christian tradition has always maintained that physical beauty, while good in itself as a reflection of God's creative beauty, becomes distorted when it's treated as the primary or ultimate measure of human worth. St. Francis de Sales, in his Introduction to the Devout Life, addresses this directly. He argues that the obsession with physical appearance, whether in ourselves or others, prevents us from seeing what he calls the beauty of the soul, which is where authentic attractiveness ultimately resides. This doesn't mean physical attraction is unimportant or that we should pretend it doesn't exist. The Catholic understanding acknowledges that humans are embodied souls. We're not pure spirits, and physical attraction plays a legitimate role in romantic relationships. However, the Church teaches that physical attraction should be integrated with attraction to the person's character, virtue, and spiritual beauty. When Ashley struggles to believe that truly attractive people could be genuinely interested in her, she's still operating within the cultural framework that reduces attraction to physical appearance. The Catholic vision offers a more complete understanding. Authentic attraction includes physical elements, but it's primarily about recognizing the beauty of another person's entire being, their kindness, intelligence, courage, humor, faith, and countless other qualities that reflect the image of God within them. That's why the church emphasizes the importance of friendship as the foundation of marriage. In conclusion, in genuine friendship, we come to know and love the whole person, not just their physical appearance or sexual attractiveness.
Mr. Mick, the relationship aspect is particularly heartbreaking. Ashley describes it being desired privately but never publicly, being good enough for sexual encounters but not for introduction to families. How this pattern reflect broader cultural problems with sexuality and commitment, which is you did already discuss a while ago. So let's. It seems like this is struggle with beauty standards, isn't it? How have Christians throughout history dealt with the cultural pressures around physical appearance?
Sure, that's a way to pick up on move where we're absolutely right that it isn't new. Early Christian communities faced similar challenges in Greco Roman culture, which had its own rigid beauty standards and practices of sexual commodification. The Church Fathers' responses offer remarkable insights for our current situation. St. John Chrysostom, writing in 4th century Constantinople, addressed a culture obsessed with physical beauty and luxury. His homilies frequently critique what he called the theater of vanity, the social performance of beauty standards that distracted from authentic virtual and spiritual development. He wasn't condemning physical beauty itself, but rather the cultural system that made external appearance the measure of human worth. Chrysostom's insight is particularly relevant to Ashley's story. He argued that when societies became obsessed with physical appearance, they create what he called spiritual blindness, the inability to see the true beauty that comes from virtue, wisdom, and holiness. The cruel treatment Ashley experienced represents this spiritual blindness in action. St. Augustine offers another helpful perspective. In his City of God, he addresses how beauty standards function as part of what he calls the earthly city, human systems organized around pride, competition, and domination rather than love and service. Augustine argued that the City of God operates by different principles entirely, where worth is determined by our relationship to God rather than our conformity to human standards. Perhaps most significantly, The medieval mystics developed rich theologies of beauty that directly challenge modern beauty culture. Julian of Norwich, Hildegard of Bingen, and Mechthild of Magdeburg all wrote about what Julian calls the beauty of the beloved, the way God sees and loves each person. This is where it speaks directly to the wound Ashley describes. The mystics, in conclusion, insisted that every person possessed what Hildegard called sacred beauty, a reflection of divine love that cannot be distinguished by external appearance or cultural rejection.
Mr. Mick, that integration you mentioned seems to be exactly what's missing in Ashley experiences. But how do we help people who've been wounded by these patterns discover authentic sexuality and relationships?
Healing from sexual and relational trauma requires what the church calls integral formation, addressing the spiritual, psychological, emotional, and social dimensions of the person simultaneously. Ashley's story suggests she's already begun this process by learning to value herself despite cultural messages to the contrary. The first step is what Ignatius of Loyola calls healing of memories, allowing God's love to transform painful experiences. This often requires both spiritual direction and appropriate psychological support. The church has always recognized that grace builds on nature, which means that healing spiritual wounds often requires addressing their psychological and emotional dimensions as well. Catholic spiritual tradition offers specific practices for this healing. The Ignatian Examen, for example, helps people recognize how God has been present even in painful experiences. Many people who've experienced rejection begin to see how their suffering has developed empathy, wisdom, and compassion that become gifts to others. The practice of Lectio Divina, meditative prayer with scripture, can be particularly healing for people struggling with self worth. Spending time with passages like Psalm 139, "You are fearfully and wonderfully made," or Isaiah 43, "You are precious in my sight," allows God's perspective on human dignity to gradually replace cultural messages about worth and beauty. Community involvement in authentic Catholic life also provides what psychologists call corrective experiences, relationships that demonstrate genuine love and acceptance based on the person's inherent dignity rather than their external appearance or utility. Many people discover their true worth through experiencing authentic Christian community. For romantic relationships specifically, the church recommends what St. Francis de Sales called virtuous courtship, relationships that prioritize friendship, shared values, and genuine compatibility over immediate sexual gratification. In conclusion, this approach naturally reveals the full beauty of potential partners and provides space for real intimacy to develop.
Mr. Mick, let's get to the philosophical foundation here. How does natural law teaching help us understand what authentic beauty really is?
Natural law provides the metaphysical foundation for understanding beauty that our culture desperately needs. According to St. Thomas Aquinas, beauty has three essential qualities: integrity, proportion, and clarity. These aren't primarily about physical appearance, they're about the nature of reality itself. Integrity means wholeness. Something is beautiful when all its parts work together according to its nature. A human person has integrity when their body, soul, mind, and spirit are properly integrated according to their dignity as a person made in God's image. The fragmentation that Ashley experiences, being valued for some physical attributes while being rejected as a complete person, violates human integrity and therefore true beauty. Proportion refers to proper relationships. Beauty emerges when things are related to each other according to their true nature and purpose. In human relationships, this means treating each person according to their inherent dignity rather than their utility to us. The men who desire Ashley sexually while rejecting her personally are violating proportion. They're not relating to her according to her true nature as a complete person. Clarity means that something's true nature shines forth clearly. In persons, clarity refers to what we might call authenticity, when someone's external experience and appearance, words, and actions express their true inner beauty. The self acceptance that Ashley is learning represents a growth in clarity. She's learning to let her true dignity shine while forth, despite cultural messages to the contrary. Natural law teaches that these qualities of beauty exist in every human person because we're made in God's image. Physical appearance can reflect these qualities, but it can never fully contain or exhaust them. That is why the church insists that reducing human beauty to physical appearance is not just culturally harmful, but metaphysically false. It misunderstands the nature of human persons. The implications are profound. If authentic beauty is grounded in human nature rather than cultural standards, then every person possesses inherent beauty that cannot be diminished by physical appearance, social rejection, or any external circumstance. In conclusion, this doesn't mean physical differences don't exist or don't matter, but it means they're not the measure of a person's worth or beauty.
Measure make the radical vision compared to our culture approach to beauty. How do we help people internalize these understandings, especially those who have been wounded like Ashley?
Yes, this is countercultural, which is the internalization of authentic beauty and requires what St. Paul calls renewal of mind, a fundamental transformation of how we think about ourselves, others, and reality itself. This happens through both grace and practice. Prayer is fundamental because it establishes our identity in relationship to God rather than cultural approval. The Psalms are particularly powerful for this because they repeatedly affirm human dignity while acknowledging human struggles. Psalm 8's declaration that humans are crowned with glory and honor speaks directly to someone who has been told they're worthless because of physical appearance. The sacramental life also plays a crucial role. The Eucharist, in particular, embodies the Catholic understanding of human dignity. God becomes present in ordinary bread and wine, demonstrating that divine beauty can be found in the most humble realities. For someone struggling with self worth based on appearance, regularly receiving communion is a profound affirmation of their worthiness to receive God Himself. Intellectual formation is also important. Learning Catholic anthropology, understanding what the church actually teaches about human dignity, sexuality, and beauty provides an alternative framework to cultural messages. Many people have never heard the church's positive vision of human sexuality and beauty because they've only encountered cultural caricatures of Catholic teaching. Community life within authentic Catholic culture provides what psychologists call social learning, experiencing relationships based on different values than those that dominate secular culture. Many people discover their true worth through experiencing genuine Christian friendship and community. Finally, works of mercy and service provide what we might call dignity therapy. Both giving and receiving service remind us of the inherent dignity that makes us worthy of love and capable of loving others. In conclusion, many people who struggle with self worth discover their beauty through serving others and experiencing how their unique gifts contribute to human flourishing.
Mr. Mick, as we wrap up, what would you want someone like Ashley or anyone struggling with similar wounds around beauty and self worth to understand about their dignity and their future?
I would want them to know that their struggle with beauty standards reveals something profound about human nature and our deepest longings. Every person is what St. John Paul II called a universe of beauty, a unique reflection of God's infinite love and creativity that could never be adequately captured by any cultural standard or reduced to any external characteristic. The journey toward authentic self acceptance isn't about learning to settle for less or convincing ourselves that appearance doesn't matter. There's a transformation that implications not just for personal healing, but for cultural renewal. The church's vision isn't just about individual salvation, but about the renewal of human culture according to God's design. For someone healing from appearance based rejection, this means that their personal journey towards wholeness is a contribution to the healing of our wounded culture. In conclusion, this is the hope the gospel offers, not just personal consolation, but participation in God's work of transforming human culture according to his original design, where every person is recognized, valued, and loved according to their inherent dignity as a beloved child of God. So, the dialogue represents a Catholic response to contemporary struggles with beauty standards and self worth, offering personal healing and cultural transformation through authentic Christian anthropology grounded in natural law and human dignity. And for others, this is what we would hope. Their choice is to value themselves according to God's perspective rather than cultural standards becomes a forum of evangelization, a living witness to the truth about human dignity that our world desperately needs to rediscover. Every person who learns to see themselves and others according to Catholic anthropology becomes a participant in what Pope Francis calls the revolution of tenderness, the transformation of human relationships from use to love, from exploitation to gift, from commodification to genuine community. Individuals learn to ground their identity in authentic human dignity rather than cultural approval. They become agents of cultural change, living examples of an alternative vision of human worth and beauty that challenges and ultimately transforms the systems that wound people like Ashley. And for those of us who now say, let's move forward, we hope that what you can do is listen to all the new podcasts, such as mental health. And if you want to reach out to me, this is Bick, the Doctor of Digital. Create a valued book in 90 days. Reach out on LinkedIn. You can also pick up a couple volumes on Amazon. That is On Track Ian Hunter and Burning America. And also, of course, what I hope you do is listen to the Doctor of Digital podcast. Until next time, Deus Vult.